I've read all about you the last 2 or 3 weeks. Apple decrypting that one telephone from the San Bernardino shooters. You've told a reporter that no company should be above the law, including court orders. Who is above the law right now?
Well, nobody, but Apple seems to think that they can give the Heisman to a judge. And I hope the judge has the right reaction to that stiff arm that they've given him. Here's the deal. This isn't about a cell phone. This is about the need to refine, as technology changes, how we apply the law. And the law was always meant to apply equally. If you look back at the claim that they're exempt from this, what was exempt was internet service providers, then AOL, and folks that didn't store data. Any company that stores data, any company that facilitates data in motion was never meant to be exempt. And as we move forward, where every database in America and every communication is going to be encrypted, does that mean everybody gets to ignore a court order? I don't think so. So this isn't a personal vendetta with Apple or with the tech industry. It's to say that as technology changes, as we apply encryption to everything, so do they have to respond to a legal court order. If not, we won't be able to make a criminal case in any county in America. And you'll have your district attorneys who will leave people living in neighborhoods that they know are criminals.
Tell Doug and Diane Tar Heel exactly what your bill will do. Is it only geared towards this one instance, or would you create a new federal law that would allow the power of the courts to compel encrypted data to be decrypted by the company that owns it?
Actually, neither. What we're trying to do is we're trying to recodify that a legal court order applies to everybody, and that only a judge can make the determination to issue one. Therefore, they've made the judgment that there is cause to do it. And as a matter of fact, we don't penalize in our piece of legislation. That's the role of the judge. If in fact somebody doesn't respond, a judge today decides if there's a fine. That should be how it happens in the future. But I believe it goes much further than that, Kelly. I think it'll be shareholders of companies that look at their companies and say, are you doing the right thing? I think it'll happen to Apple. I think it'll happen to others. And I think at the end of the day, it may not require legislation. This could force a voluntary agreement. I believe whatever we do has to be organic enough that it changes over time so that it's not technology specific, it's not company specific, it's not device specific, because we don't know what's going to happen 10 years down the road. But a court order will still have the power of a judge and the legal system, and that's what's important.
I want to ask you about the pressure of the shareholders' opinion. How do you see it manifesting out there in the real world? Tim Cook won't speak to regular shareholders of Apple, but how do the shareholders tell Tim Cook, work with the federal government or national security to decrypt one phone in this case, and then we'll talk about the deeper ramifications of that?
Well, Kelly, typically a CEO and their board respond to shareholders, not just the shareholder annual meeting, but the stock price. And if in fact people lose confidence in the value of a particular company, the board will respond very quickly. I think there are conversations going on. This is a high stakes game that Apple is in. At the end of the day, I think that the American people want to prosecute the common criminal. And, oh, by the way, I think they want us to keep America safe from terrorism. But terrorism is such a small slice of what we're talking about. This is about the precedent that we set as to whether the rule of law is something that we follow in the future.
I watched a great interview between Charlie Rose and Theodore Olson. He was representing Apple, Mr. Olson was, and he says, you know, if you decrypt the iPhone, hallmark feature is the encryption. We feel safe when we buy them, if we use one. And you add one backdoor, add one instance, one time, and you've created a brand new Apple product.
And you know, Kelly, had Apple just responded to the court order and provided the access to the phone, nobody would have ever known it. Apple's done it over 70 times already. They just decided recently to stop doing it. Did they jeopardize every iPhone then? I don't think so. If they're smart enough to create the software, they're smart enough to go in, extract what they need, and close it up and seal however they did it. The misnomer is, I'm not requiring them to create a back door. I'm not requiring them to give me a key. I'm only requiring them to live up to the court order. They can do that however they want to. That's not public. And if they're smart enough to create it, they're smart enough to extract that information and seal it without jeopardizing anything.
How does this compare to some European countries? Some European countries are supportive of enhanced encryption beyond what we have now. Some say, to your point, you can't enforce and can't do proper investigations in a digital era. Backdoor encryption is the word you always hear about. How is that different? Backdoor means it's always there. You say they can seal their phone back once they open it up, make it encryptable again.
Sure. Listen, I think the way that Tim Cook has decided to use this as a global marketing tool. It really doesn't have anything to do with security. It's about global marketing. And if you look globally today, as terrorism becomes more prevalent, you're seeing countries in Europe calling me and saying, what are you guys going to do? We'd like to mirror what you do. I'll be in Europe probably about the time this show airs, talking to them about some of the thoughts that we've got. And if you look, in many cases after the attack in Paris, Europe went much further at taking away intrusion into rights and privacy than we've ever done. As we're swinging the opposite way, Europe's swinging back. Why? Because the threat's that real. Thomas Jefferson said, I'm not an advocate of frequent changes in laws and constitutions, but laws and institutions must advance to keep pace with the progress of the human mind. In other words, as technology changes, you've got to change the laws to reflect that modernization that's happening.
Is this a trust issue? In 9/11, the Patriot Act went through, became controversial, but it stayed on the books. In this case, decryption, some Republicans oppose it, support it, Democrats. Sure. There's bipartisan support and opposition to this. What's happened to the political climate now? Is this not about a phone, but more about, do I trust a senator and the federal government not to hack my phone when they have no business going in there? Is that it?
And that's exactly why I've written the legislation the way we have, because it's not a senator, it's not an intelligence community, it is a judge sitting on the bench. And if for some reason America loses confidence in a judge making a decision, then our rule of law in this country has crumbled. Remember, Apple may have a battle with me on encryption or access. They're the same company that's going to come to me to enforce their patent protection. They're relying on the rule of law for their business model. So at the end of the day, you can't have it both ways, that you apply the law sometimes, but not other times.
Just a personal question, because you put on your shoes like anybody else across this state. What's it like to wake up, and you got a lot of power, you can write legislation, but you go, I'm going after Apple on this one. Myself and Senator Feinstein with some other senators. What's it like to face down the wealthiest corporation in America on one issue that they have all the power in the world? They'll fight you tooth and nail to the Supreme Court.
Probably not the smartest thing to do in an election year, but that just proves to you that I do things not because of how they affect me in the election. I do them because I think it's what's right. And I'm looking down the road 10 years, 20 years, saying, what do we need to do now to prepare for the next generation to be able to accomplish what they're going to need to accomplish? If we, in fact, punt on this and we allow Apple to say we're excluded, we don't have to recognize a court order, everybody will do it in the future. And then where is the rule of law?
To the counterpoint, they say if there's ever a back door, to use the term, ever even temporarily installed on an iPhone, then the government will put back doors on every other piece of hardware that's currently encrypted. What do you say to that?
Then I'm not asking them to create a back door. I'm asking them to use whatever surgical means they find to extract only what the court wants them to have. And Apple didn't seem to be as concerned when they entered the Chinese market. And the condition to let them sell in China was they had to store 100% of the data in China. Now, ask the average person, are you more worried about data stored in China and whether the Chinese have access to it, or a court order in the United States for a phone for a criminal investigation? I think the American people would weigh in, and it's a double standard.
You know, that question was way down my list, but I do want to ask you about that, because, you know, you sell an encrypted phone, and some of these authoritarian regimes are out there, and encryption makes those citizens, you can do a lot of sneaking around online if you can get through virtual networks and this kind of thing. How does that weigh out with branding with any company that wants to sell in China or somewhere where they don't have freedom of speech versus the request you've made? They feel they have to put the stake in the ground in America, if nowhere else, even if they give away the farm privacy-wise in China.
Well, the stake in the ground here is because we have a rule of law. The exact thing that we're getting stiff-armed on in this particular case, which is incredible to some degree. And I think as the American people learn more about this and understand what's at stake, they'll realize that you can't have it both ways as a company, that America is built on the rule of law. We are the country of innovation. Technology will always be first here because we have patent protection and we enforce it and we have a rule of law when it's questioned. Eliminate the patent protection, eliminate the rule of law, then the technology and the innovation is going to move to where the customers are. And that just happens not to be the United States. We're 30% of the global market from the standpoint of consumers. China's much bigger. Africa in 2030 will be the most populated continent in the world.
Statistics sometimes lie, but not always.
Yeah.
You know, to this Apple point, how would it work? Would the court be satisfied if Apple took the phone into its own ecosystem, extracted the information, and said, "Here, Judge, this is what they said"?
Absolutely.
They would trust Apple to deliver the information, even if Apple never told the government, never told FBI how they decrypted that phone. It's really about the paper trail you could print off of that phone or whatever info you wanted. Is that how that works in your mind?
That's exactly how it works. Apple has volunteered this particular phone, but I don't want this to be a debate about a phone.
Yeah.
This is a debate
It's everybody's phone, technically.
It's about a much larger space. It's encryption. It's devices, because it is recognizing the rule of law. But we haven't prescribed to Apple or to anybody else, here's how you have to do it. They can decide exactly how they comply with it. And the beautiful thing is they don't have to share with anybody how they did it.
Just supply the information. And
Correct.
the case goes on, or the investigation, I guess, is now after the fact. How would your federal law interact with, in the general sense, we don't know details of state legislation, New York, California, at least thinking about banning phones that can't be decrypted from their marketplaces as a state issue?
Because of the frustration of people like the District Attorney of New York, Cy Vance, who's had a similar case with Apple and has a phone that he needs to make a methamphetamine case. And he can't make it without getting in the phone, and Apple refuses and has appealed. What we would see if we clarified this once and for all was we'd see states stop these efforts, and district attorneys around the country would be empowered to make the cases they need to in court in local communities where they live.
I want to ask you about the legal climate. You said if we can't ever trust judges, we have nothing in this country to enforce the rule of law. But judges are often in the front lines of campaign. Antonin Scalia, you know, we may not have a confirmation hearing before President Obama leaves
Make
office.
no mistake, we will have no confirmation
Okay,
hearing.
well, there you go. There's a judge right in the middle of it. And it's because of trust that we may not have that or will not, as you say. So how is the legal climate, and what has politics done to the ordinary person when they look at judges who issue these mandates and court orders and on a whole host of issues, from decrypting a phone to same-sex marriage and other issues that are truly hot button out there?
That Tim Cook has the same avenues that an average American does. If they don't believe the judge made the right decision, they appeal. An appeal court would look at it. If they don't believe that's right, it could find its way all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's why that court was set up. And I might say, since we've talked about the Supreme Court, this is about precedent as well. In over 80 years, we haven't allowed a president to make a nomination and receive a vote in the last year of their last term. Not since Roosevelt tried to stack the deck in the court. He tried to expand the court. He tried to coerce justices to retire so that he could load the court. The American people were outraged. Only one time, when Reagan made a nomination a year before his last term and the Senate carried the vote over to the last term, has the Senate ever voted on a Supreme Court justice in the last year. So to change that precedent is to risk the chance of the Supreme Court being the most political branch of the federal government. And the Supreme Court has to be that impartial umpire, because they're there to rule between the executive and the legislative branch, and hopefully to do it consistently with the Constitution. If, in fact, we allow that precedent to be changed, then every president will look for an opportunity to take old justices and tell them to retire and put 40-year-olds on that can serve for 30 years. And you won't have the makeup of a court that resembles impartial.
Why not wait for the court to play out before filing your legislation? There is separation of powers if you've taken your social studies class, but you could wait for the courts to rule on Apple or encryption, decryption, but You file legislation. How does that balance out?
That I don't think it behooves the American people for every one of these cases to have to go through the legal system. And in the case of Cy Vance in New York, there's a dangerous person that created a meth lab that needs to be prosecuted and if found guilty, needs to be incarcerated. In the case of San Bernardino, we wouldn't be asking for this phone if there wasn't investigatory reasons that we're asking. So the safety and security of the American people is at play in the San Bernardino case. But going forward, we need to sort this out, because as more and more companies utilize encryption, does that mean that we're going to have every company in America that served a legal court order going through the process all the way to the Supreme Court? It's not going to help our district attorneys, our prosecutors around the country.
Do you blame Apple for fighting this one? I mean, you're on the Senate Intelligence Committee and you're the chairman. You know secrets nobody knows, really. But can you blame a company for going, no, I don't want to bend over for the federal government? That's just not what we do.
It's not for the federal government. It's for the rule of law. It's for future generations. And I think to look at it as a marketing tool for a company is a huge tactical mistake on their part. The world's changing, but the rule of law can't change, and it can't change as to how we apply it.
Most importantly, what are the North Carolinians telling you about this? You can fight in California all you want, but this is home.
Oh, listen, I think everybody wants their data protected. I do as well. I understand just how aggressive individuals, nations, and intelligence organizations around the world are trying to target the collection of data here. The federal government is the worst, as has been proven, at protecting our systems. So there's true value to what technology and these innovators, the smart people at Apple and Google and the rest of them, can provide for us in our own need of securing data. But rest assured that the world in the future is going to be all about how we use that data, hopefully in the right way and not in the wrong way, because that data is the entry point to anybody's secure system.
Setting aside this philosophical debate over the iPhone, which of course dominated, but I want to ask you about other foreign entanglements. What are Republicans feeling about getting into international waters again, international lands? Last decade, we went into Iraq, Afghanistan, lots of public support. Sentiment changed in the American public in many, many sectors. Democrats have always not been so fond of war. Republicans, you have your Trumps, your Cruzes, and your Rubios with different ideas, and they're all claiming the Republican mantle. So what are Republicans thinking about war?
Well,
are they tired of troops?
Yeah, let me say this. I don't think anybody likes war.
Well, no one likes war.
Yeah. Republicans are very reluctant, without a reason, to actually put troops' lives on the line. And I think Donald Trump makes a very compelling argument. When you see people beheaded, when you see individuals put in a cage and burned or drowned, the world looks at the United States to lead. And we have. We led in World War II, and we've led ever since. Saddam Hussein's removal, never for me, was about 9/11. It was about genocide. It was about the 400,000 individuals that he killed, the same reason that President Clinton chose to go into Yugoslavia, Kosovo, Serbia. And I could make the case that Syria, just on the genocide issue, demands that the United States and Europe respond to the Assad government. Just so happens that we also have genocide right in that same region with al-Baghdadi and the ISIL fighters, 25,000 strong. And I think most have said that it needs to be eliminated. I think it needs to be eliminated now. And I think we need to make whatever accessible that is needed. If that's air power, if it's boots on the ground, but it has to be done with an international coalition. I don't think anybody's approached it in my lifetime better than George Bush 41, when he kicked Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And it was Saddam Hussein against the rest of the world. You could mobilize the rest of the world against ISIL. That's how big a threat, and it's how horrific what they do is.
You know, a lot of people are confused about the Syrian conflict. You want to defeat ISIS. The American policy is to rid the world, or at least the leadership, of Bashar Assad. But Vladimir Putin is supporting Bashar Assad, and he's not exactly an ally of America. So where do we go first? Stabilize Syria, defeat ISIS? And how do you explain that to folks out there who might see a minute-and-a-half news report every other day on it, but still not get the whole picture?
Well, you know, I can give my opinion on it. I can't give the strategies of this administration because we don't have one in the region. It was to remove Assad, and we drew a line in the sand, and then we very carefully erased that red line. They say it's to fight ISIL and to eliminate ISIL, though the president says we contain them. Yet Paris is attacked, San Bernardino happens, ISIL fighters grow.
You don't see that as lone wolf. You see that as a link, if just intellectually, back to that movement.
Listen, there's a radicalization that's happening that extends everywhere, and it is impossible to put your finger on it. But in San Bernardino, just as an example, last year the FBI apprehended 72 individuals that were going to commit terrorist acts in the United States. All of those have either been prosecuted or are in the process. 9 so far this year. Those are public numbers. We only missed 2. We missed Garland, Texas, and we were 20 minutes behind the Garland shooter. San Bernardino, we never even knew this couple existed. We didn't know who they were. We didn't know they'd been radicalized because all their communications happen with encrypted communications. So for the American people, they expect us to be ahead of these. And the FBI deserves a lot of credit. I fear that our number is going to be a little bit lower this year and a little bit lower next year if, in fact, we don't go to where they plan these things and eliminate the planning cells. That's in Syria, it's in Iraq, now it's becoming in Libya. It's in 14 different countries around the world. Had we jumped on this 3 years ago, it was just Syria. So there's every reason to put together that international coalition, but you've got to have a leader that's willing to go expend the capital that's needed to put it together. This administration won't do that.
Yeah, talking of ISIS, you were mentioning how they spread propaganda, those videos. Do Senate leaders, do the national security senators and representatives, do you watch those propaganda videos just to see what these folks are willing to do, or do you not?
Well, I can't speak for other members except.
Have you seen those videos of the guy being drowned and
Sure,
the
sure,
fellow being burned,
sure.
the pilot being burned?
I read every monthly Inspire magazine that comes out of Al-Qaeda. I read the magazine that comes out of ISIL.
You know, people think they'll be put on a list or something if they download that and read it. You know, but I've heard of people say, "I'm scared to look at that stuff on my computer."
That probably would be a red flag for them. But here's the reality: that when you go through the magazine and you see one page devoted to how do you create a bomb that you put in a computer and stick on an airplane, we just had one. It came out of the Middle East where the individual killed himself. He got sucked out of the plane. The plane was able to land. That was a month or so ago. We saw the Russian airliner that was brought down with some type of explosive that made it through security. That could be in the United States. We've got to be ahead of that. And if we feel like we can't detect those, then you've got to go to the source of the operational planning, and you've got to eliminate that.
And you're not scared of the propaganda. Is it easy reading? Is it designed to convince someone out there, that lone wolf, to do?
It's designed to radicalize individuals, but also to present them the roadmap as to how to do it.
As a leader in that sector, national security, how do you balance when you see something that makes you angry? It has to move you emotionally to see a video that is so graphic. How do you weigh that against making a sound policy decision that represents American values as best possible?
I think just Diane's and my response to the Apple issue is an indication. We could have written a new bill. We could have tried to institute civil penalties against Apple. We could have prescribed everything. We didn't. I think what we did was something rational, reasonable, something that hopefully might stimulate a voluntary agreement and not even require legislation. But what we tried to do was we tried to get ahead of the pendulum swing. We tried to get ahead of the next attack in the United States or in Europe, Because when it happens, there's a tendency on the part of legislators, regardless of where you are, to swing too far. And what she and I tried to do was swing to the middle, to the right spot, so that we can get ahead of it. But if something happens, people can look and say, we've got the right balance in place.
U.S. Senator Richard Burr